Okay, continuing on now, we're going to discuss um, functions of the heart chambers in a little bit more detail here in the third lecture. And I'm also going to start covering some of the heart anatomy. So if you have not done so already, you probably want to print out those diagrams of the heart that I made available to you in the Chapter 18 module, because those will come in handy. And you probably also want to have your Chapter 18 study guide with you so you can check off some of the heart anatomy features that are required as we go through those. So this is a pretty good diagram from your textbook, which has lots of different parts on here labeled, and we've cut open the chart of the heart, so that we can see the internal structures. And as we talked about before, I think I'm going to change my pen color here. The heart is divided up into 4 chambers, or spaces that fill up with blood. So over on the right hand side, you've got a right atrium and a right ventricle. That's the bigger chamber. And over on the left hand side, you've got a left atrium and a left ventricle. And if you guys remember, your atria receive blood, and then they send the blood down into the ventricles, and then the ventricles pump the blood out of the heart. So they wind up pumping the blood up into these large blood vessels that you see there leading off of the top of the heart. So your ventricles are your pumps. All right, what I'm going to do now is flip over to visible body. And what I've brought up in visible body, I've got obviously the left lung and the right lung over here with the heart in the center, so you can kind of see how the lungs wrap around the anterior side of the heart to some degree. And what I'm going to do, let's see, I've got multi-select on. I'm going to fade the lungs for a moment here so we can see what's going on inside the lungs. And I like this view because all this tree trunk stuff that you see going on over here consists of, you've got veins, pulmonary veins, pulmonary arteries, and then you've also got, kind of in the light pinkish color or lavender color you see there, those are air-filled passages. So those contain the air that has been brought down through the trachea and on into the bronchi that then branch off and bring air to all different parts of the lungs. So these air-filled tubes are going to intermingle with very tiny blood vessels in the lungs, where gas exchange will take place next to these really tiny little air-filled compartments that are scattered all throughout the insides of the lungs. So I think that's a pretty nice view. So as you guys remember, you have pulmonary arteries. Arteries are vessels that carry blood away from the heart. So pulmonary arteries bring this blood to the lungs as part of the pulmonary circuit, distributed all throughout the lungs. You have gas exchange that takes place, and then you have pulmonary veins that take that oxygen-rich blood back to the heart. So that's what we'll wind up taking a closer look at here as we cover your heart anatomy. All right, and there I've stripped off the lungs altogether. I think I'm going to change views here so we can just focus in on the heart more so. Bring up our heart. Here we go. Here's our heart. Heart's sitting in, the way that's zoomed in, that's the way it's sitting in your chest. And if I rotate the heart around over here, let's take a look at your anatomy list. Now, we've already talked about the base of the heart, if you guys remember. We said the base of the heart is not where you would think. You think it's down here on the bottom, but the base of the heart is actually up in here. Let me change my pen color. I'm going to use blue for a while. All right, that's the base area of the heart. The apex is this little pointy area down in here. That's the apex. And then we've talked about the layers of the heart wall. We've talked about the pericardial cavity and the fibrous pericardium, the visceral pericardium, and the parietal pericardium. So be sure you review all of those things, the location of the pericardial fluid. And then looking at the outside of the heart, get out of my pen here just for a second. I rotate the heart around. This is the right side of the heart over here that we're taking a look at. And then over here, here's your left side, left and right. And the way you can kind of see, if you're looking at an anterior view of the heart, you got these big blood vessels that are kind of running down this crease that you have there, more or less in the middle on the front side of the heart. That's your dividing line between the left side over here and the right side over here. If I kind of rotate this around, everything I'm outlining here with the cursor right over here, in fact I can highlight that, that is the right atrium right in there, all of that. And if I rotate the heart around this way, you can see how far the right atrium extends around the back side of the heart. Okay, that's the right atrium. And then the right ventricle, looking at this from the outside, I'm going to draw this in with my pen. The borders on the outside, more or less like what I'm showing you there with my pen. That's the right ventricle. All right, if I rotate the heart around this way, here's your left ventricle, all of this over here on the left-hand side of the heart. And then your left atrium is all of this area up in here. There's your left atrium. Okay, so that's if you're viewing on the outside of the heart. Now I can click on that. The left atrium visible body highlights in blue for me. So there's left atrium, there's the right atrium. And there we're just focusing in again on the left atrium. Divisions between the atria and the ventricles. See how you've got these large blood vessels kind of running along this border right in through here. Those are another indicator to let you know where the borders are between the atria and the ventricles. So all of that over here is left ventricle. Visible body does not, when I'm clicking on the exterior of the heart here, does not light those up directly like it does for the atria. All right, a couple of other things from your study guide. Do you see how, all right, so this is the right atrium over here. I'm going to deselect that. Do you see how it kind of looks a little frilly over in here? Like there's a little thin flap over in this area. That section is called the right auricle. That's not the same as the right atrium. If you're looking on your study list, auricle is on there, A-U-R-I-C-L-E. And then so you can see it better over here on the left atrium. There's the whole left atrium highlighted in blue, but then that little flap thing that almost kind of looks like an ear, that is the left auricle. And now that flap is actually, it is flap-like, but it has some space inside it that can fill up with some blood. All right. I am going to change visible body views over here. Let's move over here and bring up this one. All right, so now we're looking inside the heart. Let me, nope, that's not what I want to do. All right, we're back. So we're taking a look at a heart view here on visible body where we've cut open the heart so you can see the ventricles are exposed, the insides of the ventricles are exposed. And we will be covering some of the details in here shortly. But so you can see you do have space in here that fills up with blood. And remember, over here, this is your right ventricle, and over here you've got your left ventricle. And when you cut open the walls of the heart, you can see the heart muscle there is pretty thick. And so if you guys remember, that muscular layer of the heart is called the myocardium. So that's mostly what you're seeing there with the heart cut open. And don't forget the surface of the heart, we said it's called the epicardium, and that's also, you can also refer to that as the visceral pericardium. And then the inner lining in here that lines that space on the inside is called our endocardium. All right, and on the atria, what I can do is fade that for you, the surface, and just imagine in there you've got space that fills up with blood. Same over here. We can fade the left atrium for you, and you have a blood-filled space in there. Okay, and then those openings that you see there, you have one right here, and you have another one over here on this side of the heart, on the left side of the heart. Those are called the atrioventricular orifices. An orifice is an opening. So each of those is an atrioventricular orifice. You have one of those on each side. So blood that comes back into the right atrium or the left atrium over there will pass through those openings down into the right ventricle on that side of the heart and the left ventricle over on that particular side of the heart. Then all the flaps that you're seeing there are heart valves, which we'll cover more shortly on the next video lecture clip. All right, let's take a closer look at some of the blood flow that's going on here. Since I can rotate the heart, I'm going to leave the atria here kind of faded. Blood is coming, so we said from the systemic circuit, you've got that oxygen poor, CO2 rich blood, and that is received over here in the right atrium. And where is that blood coming from? All right, so you have a big giant vein down in here. Maybe you remember this from Biology 201. That is your inferior vena cava. So that oxygen poor, CO2 rich blood from most of the lower parts of the body is being pumped upward toward the right atrium, and that blood vessel connects into the right atrium right there. And then up here you have the superior vena cava, which is a big giant vein that is receiving oxygen poor, CO2 rich blood from the head and from the arms, upper parts of the chest. And then that also is flowing into the right atrium right there. So that's where that blood is coming back. All right, and then I'm going to have to turn off the writing there so I can continue to rotate. And if I kind of rotate this around, so imagine that blood has entered the right atrium through the inferior vena cava or the superior vena cava up here, and then it's going to flow through that atrioventricular orifice down in here into the right ventricle. The right ventricle squeezes it upward, rotating the heart that way. You see this thing where you've kind of got like the three pie slices there? That is a heart valve that is leading up here towards a big giant artery. Because we said arteries carry blood away from the heart, and this big giant artery is known as the pulmonary trunk. And that pulmonary trunk is going to branch off and send that oxygen poor blood out to the lungs. So you're going to have right and left pulmonary arteries that send that blood out to the lungs. Okay, so our flow of blood is from the right atrium down into the right ventricle, and then upward through that valve into the pulmonary trunk. All right, and so then your blood is over here in the left lung or the right lung, picking up oxygen, giving up its CO2. Then it's going to travel through pulmonary veins. Veins carry blood back toward the heart. And where does that blood enter? So if I kind of rotate around, it's going to be coming back into the left atrium. You kind of see here on our, I know we've got our view faded. Let me refresh the view here. So I'm going to unfade. All right, so here is your left atrium. So you got two openings right there and there. And if I rotate it around over here, you got an opening there and an opening there. Those openings are actually connected to pulmonary arteries that are carrying oxygen-rich, CO2-poor blood back to the left side of the heart. So that's where that blood is going to enter. It comes in there. Let me fade that again for you. Okay, and then that blood is going to pass through this opening that you see down in here. That's another atrioventricular orifice. Those flaps, the white flaps you see there, are a heart valve. Rotating this back around. And now that blood is over in here in the left ventricle. And the left ventricle is going to send that blood, has to pump it out to all of the tissues of the body through the systemic circuit. So if we kind of rotate around over here, rotating my heart, look up in there, right up in there, we see another 3-pie slice looking thing there. That's another one of these heart valves. And that heart valve is the opening to this big red blood vessel that you see here, which is the aorta. That's your aorta. That's the base of the aorta. If you guys remember, the aorta is going to curve and it goes around the back side of the heart and heads down towards the abdomen. So your blood that is returning from the lungs enters the left atrium, passes down into the left ventricle, and then it pushes up through those valve flaps that you see there, enters the aorta. The aorta is a big giant artery that is going to then lead to other arteries that are going to distribute this blood to the various parts of the body. Okay, I've refreshed my view here. A couple of other things I want to point out to you while we're still here in visible body for a minute. Notice that you have this wall right in here that I'm outlining with the cursor between the left ventricle over here and the right ventricle over here. And this is called your interventricular septum, if you're following along with your study guide. Interventricular. Inter between means between, so between the ventricles. You got a pretty thick wall there that's separating the two. So all of this you see over here is part of that interventricular septum. It's that whole wall in between the two. And then another location where you have septa or walls. Let me fade the right atrium and I'm going to fade the left atrium again. But you see how you have a wall right in here in between the right atrium and the right ventricle? You know, all of that wall area right in there. Same deal over here. Not as easy to see over here on this side, but you can kind of tell if we look up in there. You've got a wall right in here that is dividing the left atrium from the left ventricle. Those are called each of those is an atrioventricular septum. That's a wall that's dividing the atria from the ventricle. So that's something else you got there on your study guide as far as anatomy. Okay, another thing I want to point out to you, if you're comparing the right side of the heart over here to the left on visible body, on which side does the myocardium, the muscular wall, look thicker? So it's probably pretty easy to tell. The left side is much thicker. If you ever dissect a heart, well, you can really feel that with your fingers when you're dissecting a real heart. The left side much thicker. So what do we think about the contraction force? The contraction force, if the muscle is thicker on the left side, is going to be more powerful. That should make sense if you think about it, because the left side of the heart is going to have to pump blood and distribute it all throughout your whole body as part of that systemic circuit. The right side over here only has to pump blood out to the lungs. So that means the right side of the heart, the walls there of the right ventricle, do not need to be nearly as thick as they do for the left ventricle. So that's just something else to point out there as well. We'll be returning to visible body. as we talk about some more of the features of the heart, but I'm gonna leave visible body for now. And I'm returning back over here to our PowerPoint, and most of the things here that are listed I've already covered as we were going through visible body, relating more or less to the function here. The atria are very thin-walled, so we took a look at how the right ventricle was thin-walled compared to the left ventricle. Well, the atria are really thin-walled, and that's because they don't really have to contract super forcefully to propel blood anywhere, because the blood that is entering your atria is just going to flow by gravity down into the ventricle. So they don't have to contract all that hard. They do contract, but not nearly as forcefully. You have 3 veins that bring blood into the right atrium. Now we've already taken a look at the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. There's a third one called the coronary sinus that we'll take a look at later. That's actually bringing deoxygenated blood from the heart wall itself. The wall of the heart itself, the myocardium, all those cells in there, they need their own blood supply, and they don't get it from the blood that's passing through the chambers. So you actually have a system of arteries and veins and arterioles and venules and capillaries that supply blood to the myocardium. Coronary sinus brings the deoxygenated blood back to the right atrium from the walls of the heart itself. Then you've got those 4 pulmonary veins we said that connected over into the left atrium. They're bringing that oxygen-rich blood back over to that side of the heart. All right, and then the ventricles, those are your pumps, your discharging chambers, and we talked about how the right ventricle pumps blood into the pulmonary trunk, and then that's going to go out to the lungs, and the left ventricle pumps blood into the aorta, your largest artery in the body, and then that goes out into the systemic circuit. Okay, so for lecture number 4, we're going to, I pointed out the heart valves when we were taking a look at the atrioventricular orifices, and for the 4th lecture, we will return to visible body and take a closer look at those heart valves and talk about how they work, and also talk about a few additional features there that were located inside the heart chambers.